so good to have you join me for this brand new episode of Navigate. We took a short break from one of our most recent themes around the topic of third culture kids, or TCKs for short. And if you're not exactly sure what that term means, just keep listening, as I am thrilled to have longtime friend, colleague, and TCK educational specialist Bethany with me on the show today. And due to the sensitive nature of the region of the world where Bethany serves, we'll be using her first name only. But don't worry, in the show notes, we'll be including some great resources as well as a way you can connect with her. Bethany's been working in Central Eurasia with TCKs since 2005. She served as a teacher, principal, and now an educational consultant for cross-cultural workers serving throughout that part of the world. And this includes countries such as Tajikistan and Turkey. She combines her passion of reaching the lost with a message of hope while supporting third culture kids and seeing them thrive on the field. And this episode will be valuable to you if you're a cross-cultural worker and you're wanting to understand and support families of TCKs. Maybe you're a church or a sending organization and you and or your team want to be better equipped to care for global worker families. Maybe you're a teen or an adult TCK wanting to understand yourself better. Or maybe you're parents of TCKs needing resources. So thanks for listening, and let's go right into my conversation with global worker and TCK educational specialist, Bethany. All right. Hey, welcome, Bethany. It is so good to have you on Navigate Podcast. I've been looking forward to this opportunity to have a conversation with you.
Me too. Thanks so much, Tim.
Yeah, so we go back a ways, and we'll kind of fill our audience, the listeners, in on that a little bit. But going way back to our time in Central Asia, when we served together, and our family was there on the field, and then you came along, and it was great just to see how, and as we talked some more, just to reminisce a little bit about how God led us there and led you there, and what path he's taken you on, and how our paths have been different in a lot of ways, the way we've developed and grown and moved into different ministry roles. But here you are now, still in Central Eurasia. We're back in the United States. You're still in Central Eurasia. And we're going to be talking about a topic that is very, I know it's near and dear to your heart, and it's very close to us because we raised three of these individuals, unique and gifted individuals called third culture kids, TCKs for short. But we don't want to assume that everyone listening is familiar with that term, third culture kid. So I would just like to start again by welcoming you and saying, can you unpack, before we hear your story, but can you start by unpacking that term or that word, third culture kids or TCKs?
Sure, absolutely. So I like to keep it really simple. If you think of a family who in their family unit, they're one culture, maybe mom and dad are for two different cultures, but there's one culture there in that home. But they place themselves, that child lives a considerable amount of their developmental years in another culture, in another country. And so you've kind of got one culture at home, another culture outside the home in the country they're living in. And then the combination of that creates this third culture. So they're sort of living in two places at once kind of thing. And that's how we get a third culture kid.
Yeah. So it's kind of, there's layers to this, isn't there?
Absolutely.
And it gets kind of complicated when we start talking about how that third culture actually forms and how that makes a third culture kid really have a different worldview, different perspectives. Sure. Yeah. What have you seen there in terms of how that third culture comes together to make that unique person they are?
Sure. Well, if you think about how we grew up, and, both you and I grew up in America, and we know the lingo of our, teenage years, and we had movies that were cool that we remember our songs, or, even our church culture that we grew up in.
Yeah.
We understood that as how we grew up. And so you have a child who lives, maybe they are American, maybe they're British, maybe they're Australian, and they're experiencing life completely different than mom and dad did. Of course, they're a different generation, but their church culture, all kinds of how you go and hang out with friends, how you interact with other families, the male and female roles, are different. What's expected of a child in one culture is different than another culture. And so I think they begin to really realize their identity issues per se, when they go back to that home culture where they are originally their passport culture, and see, oh, wow, I don't know the cool thing to say or the right clothes to wear,
right.
And so those kinds of being in two cultures, not really sure, but even the culture that they grew up in, let's say they grew up in Central Eurasia, they don't always quite feel like they fit in there sometimes. Yeah. And so one of the big issues that they have is just finding those good friends. And one of the things I try to do is bringing TCKs together as much as I can too. I want them to have their local friends. I want them to, when they're at home in their home culture, to have friends there, but also getting them to have that sense of belonging when they're with TCKs too. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. Our kids, I know, appreciated opportunities that were afforded them when we were living on the field to get together with other TCKs, and they naturally gravitated toward each other a lot of times. Right. But then others lived in more isolated areas where there weren't other third culture kids around. So we had to be intentional in some ways to get them together from time to time, because they loved being able to. Those are their peeps, their tribe, so to speak. So
their tribe.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Okay. Well, tell us. Okay. So now that we've unpacked that a little bit, tell us share your story a little bit. What's your current role in Central Eurasia? How did you get there? What have been maybe some pivotal moments or experiences that have brought you to this place of working and serving and coming alongside third culture kids and their families?
Yeah. So my current role, I am the educational consultant for our families with my organization in Central Eurasia. And I'll share with you a little bit more about what that means in just a second. But I definitely didn't just jump right into this role. You were mentioning earlier that we go way back. And it's thanks to the Austin family that I took that first step to come overseas, and you guys were huge in that. And I had been a teacher in the States for about 4 years, and with the intention always in the back of my head, I really wanted to teach overseas in a global workers kind of context. And I got a phone call one day, finally had been praying, Lord, when will the time come? And I was sitting in my 4th grade classroom after school one day doing some planning, and excuse me, I got a call from some friends of mine who knew you guys. And they said, there is a need for teachers in this Central Eurasian country that I had never heard of. And I was like, is that really a real place? And so I, after a lot of prayer and figuring out, is this really where God wants me to be? And he made it very clear that this was his plan for me. And so in 2005, I headed overseas to teach for the first time in this little school for TCKs, and loved it. I taught your son, there for 2 years. And Luke, and that was really special. And just loved it, loved everything about it, loved getting to know the locals, getting to be a part of the lives of these TCKs and their families. Just loved it. So I knew I was supposed to come back. I decided to go, that was for 2 years. I decided to go back to the States for a couple of years to work on my master's in education. I wanted to take that farther, and then worked on coming back full time with my organization. And then I was asked to return to the school and serve as their principal there. And that was really an awesome experience. I really had no idea that I loved admin so much and kind of management. And so that was really kind of one of those pivotal moments, like, wow, okay, God has put teaching as a gifting in me. I love learning about new cultures and this kind of thing, but I have some other gifts there too. And God wants to use all of those. And that was really cool. In 2014, there was an opportunity. I had been asked by our leadership if I would take this role a little bit broader as into what I'm doing now as the educational consultant. And this is something that I had seen when I was in Tajikistan. You know, the folks in my direct organization weren't homeschooling. There was one family that was a bit, but I saw those in other families in hard to reach places that would come into the capital city from time to time. And I really wanted to support those as well. And I had even asked our leadership at one point, is there a position in that way? And this was back in 2010, but that wasn't really something that was available at the time. And that was fine. And I really think God put me in this place as the principal. Anyway, so I prayed about it and really knew that, I was going to be moving to a new country. And I had no idea that I would ever leave this one Central Eurasian country. I just loved it, loved being a part of what was going on there. But God had me move. And so now I'm serving in a much bigger city, a little bit easier to get out to fly from here to some of the other spots throughout Central Eurasia. But basically I do kind of a hodgepodge of anything educational with TCKs from the start of when they first sign up with my organization. Oh, we're coming overseas. We're coming to serve as global workers. And so I connect with them and I say, hey, what's your educational plan? What are you thinking about for your kids? How old are your kids? Let's talk through some things. And then once they're here, helping them get started, whether they're homeschooling, whether they need to get into a local school, whether they need to make a change as they're on the field. You know how that is, right?
Yeah.
You guys had a lot of different things from time to time as your kids grew and situations maybe changed. And so, you've got to talk with somebody. How can we do this? What's best way to support our family, support the kids? We're going to homeschool. We need, curriculum options, all these kinds of things. And so that's what I'm there for. But I would say, as you were asking again too about some pivotal moments, I mentioned one. I don't know if you remember this, but in order to come overseas that first time, I had to read several books, and a couple of them I had to do book reports on just to make sure I'm getting the information in my head and really studying it. One of the books was a book called Re-Entry, published by YWAM. And I did not understand why in the world did I have to read this before I even got to the country I was going to. And I don't know if you remember this, but Eve, your wife, Eve, and a couple of us at the end of my first 2 years, we were, she was not at the time, your family wasn't, but some of us ladies were leaving, and we wanted to have good transition. And that's something that you guys really, really did a good job of stressing to me and to many others. Let's leave well, let's transition well. So we began to pull out this book and read that same book that I had read 2 years prior to, And I think that that was something where I understood then, this is kind of preventative, or we always want to have in our mind, we're going through transition all the time. And even though this book was specific to returning, right?
Right.
It's such an important piece to know what transition looks like, what it feels like, how it could be, how it might not be, just all these different aspects of transition, I think was wrapped up in what you guys taught me, that we as global workers, we are always in transition, and TCKs, you could say for the rest of their life, they're going to work through transition, maybe differently than the non-TCK, because life changes and they do that well. I think a lot of them, if they've been taught some of these, and that's what your work is all about, is helping folks transition well. And so that's kind of when I wanted to bring that up there, that I think personally, as a global worker, I want to do transition well, but I also want the kids that I work with to transition well in every stage of their time as a TCK. Does that?
Yeah, I thank you for sharing that. And I do remember some of the stories that you've just talked about and the experiences. Yeah, it's such a valuable resource that you are coming alongside families. A lot of you and my wife Eve both have kind of teaching backgrounds, so your roles, as I kind of saw you guys interact, would be a lot about working together when you were working at the Christian school there in Central Asia, and she was also involved and you were heavily involved, and
Right.
but it was like more like admin management, bouncing ideas off each other. But for some parents and who've never homeschooled, for example, who have never even really given much thought to how they're going to educate their kids and provide educational opportunities for their kids in a new environment, or a very maybe an isolated area, or just a place where there's less options, or you've got to get creative with the options.
Right, absolutely.
Such a valuable resource. And then that all plays into transition, because we're setting our kids up for success or failure, really, in some ways, by the way we go about providing those opportunities for them and resourcing them, and even admitting sometimes I don't have the answers. I need someone like Bethany to come alongside of us here as a family to help us here, and to help resource us. And sometimes I think our kids, I know from our experience, our kids often responded better to someone kind of outside of, in certain seasons, they will respond better to someone who comes along outside and who can relate to them, but who's not a parent, So the way you're partnering with the parents in this way is, I just think it's invaluable to the field and to the expat community living overseas. So it is interesting, like you were talking about your own personal transition, how God challenges us in seasons to go broader and to go deeper, to take those skill and to, as we learn kind of what we're passionate about. And you said, like, I really, you realize that you had these administrative and management skills and other skills besides just in the classroom.
Right.
But you took it wider and deeper. And as a result, the expat community gets that blessing. So I think you and I talked about this as we were preparing for our conversation a little bit, that it takes a village to raise a TCK. So that speaks to me about the need for supporting TCKs, third culture kids, and resourcing them. And what does it mean? What are we talking about when we say it takes a village, and what are some of the ways we can best resource them and come alongside them?
Sure. Yeah. As we think about a context in our home culture, in our Western world, I guess, is a lot of us listening here. And what did it take when we were growing up? We had grandma, grandpa close by. We have aunt and uncles. We had folks from church. We had neighbors, right? So that's that village. That's that support system. And if you think about a family that picks up from that and takes their family to a place many of them never seen, never spoken a word in that language, their houses look different. Their grocery stores look different. Their school, just everything is new. And so how are they going to get the support they need that it took when they grew up, when mom and dad grew up in their home country? And so they need support just as any child does, but especially since this is a new place that they're getting used to. So why is it so important? They say that for global workers, one of the top reasons that families leave their field of service is because the needs of their kids aren't being met. And we don't want that to happen. We don't want them to, not because, yes, if there's a great need, then yes, by all means, because the parents' first ministry is to their kids, right? Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so we want to make sure they're healthy and they're doing well. And I've heard of families where there's a health problem in a child's life. And so yes, of course, but we talk too about, we want to support these families. And so you had mentioned even mentors and having someone outside the parent speaking into the child's life, especially as they grow older. So hopefully families are nowadays, I think they are moving into teams. And so they have surrogate aunts and uncles, possibly surrogate grandma and grandpas. But then, the young people on their team, or just even other moms and dads of other children on their team or in their expat communities, are so valuable to, and new families who come on the field, they have the expertise to, humbly listen to what other families have experienced to kind of help them. And we want these kids to thrive. We want families to thrive and not just survive, right? Yeah. So in order to see that happen, they need support from theirs on the field. On the field is probably the best way to get that support because that's face-to-face, but also just even the churches that they come out of, that they're sent from when they're home and they're invited to be a part of a youth group or a children's ministry, or when they graduate, this is a big thing on my heart, is that transition from life on the field, 12th grade, whatever their final grade in school is, on to college or whatever their next step is. And making sure do they have a support where they're going to next? Do they have the tools maybe to look out for that, to get support if it's not there? But mom and dad are usually on the lookout for that too, but they need to have some tools to help with that as well. And even I was thinking about, other expats in the community offering some of these places that our families live don't really have a lot of maybe outdoors activities like sports kinds of things, or, a youth group, or just meeting place in families' homes for other, TCKs, other young people to come and hang out. And all of those are great ways to support our families, because we want them to stay. We want them to thrive. We want them to grow and develop emotionally, spiritually, academically, in every way. And I do believe that with healthy teams, with healthy environments that they're coming into, that this is totally possible. And it's really beautiful to see when you have a family. And I think that your family, Tim, was a great example of that, just how you raised your kids, but you also welcomed other people, other new folks in, and they got to watch that, whether it was someone you're going to be working with every day, or even those just in the general expat community. You guys modeled that well. And so to have those examples around is really wonderful.
Well, I know that we were intentional about bringing, exposing our kids to either short-term teams or visitors that would come to the field, or people who are working more long-term like yourself, having them over for dinner, having, ways just to connect. And as a result of that, like, our kids had many aunts and uncles, aunties and uncles on the field. And no, they weren't blood related, but they were just as impactful and influential in their lives. And that really was a support. It really was a way of giving them that connection, and of bringing that, inviting people into our family unit. But it's not, it does take intentionality, I guess is what I'm saying. It's not always convenient. It's not always something, that you may feel like you want to do all the time, but boy, it really can impact your kids in a very positive way. So yeah, I just agree with you. I think that's so important. And this stuff can just take place organically, but with some intentionality. It's not
absolutely
like you just wait around for it to happen. You do have to be intentional. But yeah, so those are some resources. You did mention the local church, or the sending church. And that too, I was thinking, as you were talking, some ways that we were supported, and maybe at other times we didn't feel very supported. What would you say to that? Like, what are some ways maybe sending churches, and when global workers go back to their home countries for furlough, for time, extended time in between assignments, whatever, or they're returning, to the field, back to their home countries because maybe that season of service has come to an end. What are some ways maybe the local church could do a better job at, or be more intentional around?
Well, I think that one of the number one things that they can do is listen and ask questions. And, what are some things, because I think that they just being more informed of whether it be life on the field, or what it's going to take, understanding what it's going to take for our family to get to the field, or what we've been through and we're now coming back. And so listening well, and then think about some of the things that maybe you would do for other kids in your family or in your community. Now, I know that for specifically where I'm at, it's hard to mail things, and so people do love, kids especially love getting goodie bags or something like that. And I know with my team and a lot of the teams that I work with, they do have, just as you mentioned, short-termers who come over. And so it is possible for somebody from a fellowship to say, hey, when somebody comes over, we want to send a little package or something like that. Or, they have e-cards now for birthdays, or remembering some of those special times is really great. Maybe even having something from a children's ministry or a youth group where they send them a little video and say, hope you're doing great, or hope your transition is going well. When they're coming back, I mentioned the youth group because I think about one family that was on furlough about a year ago, and they said for their preteens or up and coming teens, having a youth group that they could be a part of, and the kids being a little bit educated on maybe letting them tell their story, and then they're, oh, okay. So, they don't experience life like us in America. This is an American family. But they're here right now, and, we want to make friends with them. And sometimes it's hard because these families are throughout the week or on the weekends, coming and going. But if they have that, and I think moms and dads kind of need to know, where's my child at? And let's think about this, pray about this, talk with them. Do they need something maybe more consistent when they're home? On every Wednesday night, mom is staying home with the kids so that they can go and have a friendship group, that they're a part of, like a youth group. So just thinking through things like that. And I know some fellowships also have a place for them to land, or helping them gather together furniture that they might need to put together a new house, even if it's for a temporary, for a few months or a year or something like that. Helping them with those kinds of really practical things, but it makes them feel loved, even the kids, like, wow, So those kinds of things, I think, on the ground is just really, really special for them.
One extended time back in the States between assignments, we had our local church offer a really huge scholarship for our kids to attend their Christian school, which was based at the church, and that was huge. I mean, that was something, and then our kids had a good place to continue their education for that year.
Sure.
Whereas in most cases, global workers, will come back, and if there's not a lot of good schooling options, and then private schools, Christian schools, can be very expensive, and that just maybe it's not even, in the budget, so to speak. So that was a huge blessing for us to resource them in that way. And you mentioned youth groups. Yeah, that was something. Like, I remember one furlough when we were back in the States, our son Luke, ninth grade high school, entering into a big high school. It was a public high school in the U.S., in our hometown in Chico. And starting out as a freshman there, that's hard to break into to friendships and connection in that way. But he, even the extrovert that he was, it was challenging. But the youth group of our local church really kind of took him in and just included him and got him involved in leading worship and stuff. And so that was a big kind of a lifesaver, for that time for him. So there's always ways I think the local church can just be more aware, saying kind of, I see you and we recognize you, and we want to come alongside you as you can continue to engage with TCKs and their families and the communities surrounding them. What are you most concerned about?
Well, I'm responsible for connecting with a good number of families. And I think my two things that I'm thinking of, one I've kind of already mentioned, but first of all, I don't want any child or any family to fall through the cracks, and my role is not such that I'm not, as far as my educational side of things, I'm not a truancy officer making sure, where if you're homeschooling, you're doing I'm really a resource that people reach out to. Now, I intentionally reach out to them from the get-go. And then throughout the school year, each school year, there's a couple of times where I connect and just say, mainly with the moms, like, how's things going? You have any particular struggles? What can I be praying for you with the kids? This kind of thing. And so it kind of is on there for them to come and reach out for me further if they need more support. And so sometimes, folks are just going at it and they're doing great and moving along. And I guess I just I want to make sure that I invest in each family well. And I want to help families to catch things before anything snowballs, and I want to offer them the resources that they need. Now, you mentioned before, not having all the answers. Oh my goodness. I understand parents might think they don't have all the answers, so they want to come to me, but I don't have all the answers all the time too. So, I believe in resources and finding out what's out there. So I want to connect people well to what their need is. And then I think, second of all, it really boils down to the many transitions, the different stages in a child's development and a family's development, and how to help them well in their transitions. And I think the one that's just kind of on my radar a lot lately is that transition from high school into what's next for the child after graduation. And I just so want to see our kids, and parents do too, of course. They want to see them thrive after going back to whatever that next thing is, whether it be a gap year or whether it be adjusting back to life in their passport country. Because we see a lot of concerning things that maybe if there's a great resource that I highly recommend called The Grief Tower by Lauren Wells. If you have TCKs, I highly recommend reading this little book. It's not very big, but it just talks about and we as global workers, we deal with griefs all the time, and we say goodbyes a lot. We go through, and so kids do too. And we know that they're resilient, but we do still need to instill in them tools to process through griefs that they have. And I do not want to see, nobody wants to see parents, surrogate aunts and uncles, caregivers, mentors. We don't want to see them flounder afterwards. And so I want to help support them in that way too. So those two things, like just having consistent flow of care for families throughout their time, getting on the field, going on the field, leaving the field, and all of that encompasses lots of transition.
Yeah, good. Yeah, and some of those resources you mentioned and others that may come to your mind, I will be putting those in the show notes for our listeners to have as a resource. So we'll put links in there. We'll put some even ways they can reach out to you directly with questions. So that'll be a great way for them to find these, because we can talk about these, but I know that it's easy to if you don't kind of get the link and can click on a link or something like that, it's easy to forget. So we'll make sure those are in the show notes. Transition, just to kind of piggyback off what you said, transition is certainly full of opportunities to grieve, and also transitions of all sorts involve some kind of loss. So you've got that. And I think a lot of times the first step is just helping our TCKs to acknowledge there's loss here and to put that into words, to find language for it, but also to have resources and people to come alongside to say, this may be the end of this season, or this season may be coming into end, but there's something new. There's something God has for you in this next season. And I think one of my episodes that I interviewed Chad Phillips, who he had mentioned that too, that was a big piece of a focus on his radar as well, helping our kids from high school into the next thing. And I like that you said high school to the next thing, because it's not always college right away.
Sure, absolutely.
Sometimes our TCKs need that gap year, or just need something else in that transition. So, Bethany, love the fact that what you're doing, and it's been a privilege to work with you in Central Asia and serve alongside you. And I know my wife appreciates you so much as well. And just just to give you a shout out, because you guys, you really laid a lot of foundation out there in Central Asia at the Christian school that started out just as a little a few families saying, let's get together and work together to educate our kids. And that grew. And I just heard that recently it became accredited,
Yes,
that's
right.
awesome. Yeah. I think it's Association of Christian Schools International.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that little school out there in Central Asia has grown and become established, and you were a big part of that, building some of that structure. So, it's just amazing to see what the Lord has done even with that, so that, parents, global workers, and their kids can be better resourced and supported in their journeys with their kiddos. So,
And I think that's a perfect example of it takes a village to raise a child. And really, I would hope and pray that every team, every community, you don't have to have a TCK school, to have that village, but that moms and dads and other workers are resourced and have tools in their tool belt to help those kids, love on those kids, mentor those kids to thrive and to grow into incredible men and women of God. And it really does take a village. I really like how you said that. And I didn't do that alone by any means. There were so many people before me, with me, and after me, to see what's happened there. And God's on the move. He is working in the hearts of these kiddos, and it's really special to see.
Yeah, it is. Well, thanks so much, Bethany. Again, it's been great to have you on the show, and to hear your story a little bit, and just to see what God is doing in and through you as you come alongside TCKs and their families. Any last parting words for our listeners before we sign off here?
Yeah, I would just say, pray for our TCKs. If you would lift them up to the Lord, they need our prayers. Every young person right now is growing up in uncertain times, but we know that our God is a great, big God. He is in control, and just praying for wisdom for moms and dads, for even leadership in organizations, and how to folks getting the vision both at home and on the ground to support our kids well. Yes, I agree. Thank you so much, Bethany. Hey, it's been great to have you on the show. It's an honor. I love being here. Thank you, Tim. God bless you. God bless. Bye-bye. As I reflect back on living overseas as a family, I'm so grateful that throughout those 20 years, we had kids in our home, starting out with a 10-month-old to ending up with 3 TCKs that we guided from preschool through high school, all while doing life overseas. And I'm most grateful for my wife as she worked tirelessly to educate our kids, as well as the folks like Bethany and others who came alongside us and our kids in the process. I am not a TCK. I didn't grow up in another culture, nor did my wife. But we had the audacity to believe that God would take care of our kids, shaping them into the healthy adults they are now, even in places which lacked all the bells and whistles of a traditional Western culture education. Be encouraged today and take advantage of all the resources made available to help support you, whatever your relationship to TCKs may be. Bethany has shared some great resources, which I've included in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of Navigate, where our goal continues to be taking the guesswork out of transition. And coaching is a powerful way to process change and get clarity and move forward. Book a discovery call with me at EncompassLifeCoaching.com to learn more about the coaching services I offer. And I'll catch you next time.